What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 491. My name is Marshall, one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from snowy Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Is it still snowing? It can't.
Whoa. It was snowing the last 2 days, and today it's 70 and sunny. That is how Denver. Also, it's mid-May, so that's how Denver rolls.
Man, that actually reflects my last visit to Denver when I was there for the GP, where it was sunny, then snowing, then sunny again. It was like, all right, whatever.
You'll have 4 seasons throughout the course of 2 days.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. So we've got kind of a mishmash of stuff for the show this week. We're going to be talking about War of the Spark, of course, giving you more impressions and updates and stuff like that. And then also just a few kind of interesting things came up in the Magic community for talking points. There was an article about the complexity of Magic we want to talk about, and a couple of cool questions that came in from some listeners as well. So that's what we're going to be covering this week on Ye Olde Limited Resources. First things first, though, our sponsor, channelfireball.com, is a place to go for anything you need Magic related. That means singles. If you're looking for singles to fill out your Commander deck or standard deck or your modern deck or whatever, you can go to Channel Fireball and you're going to find competitive prices, and they're going to get those things shipped out to you nice and quick. And of course, they always stand by their product as well. They will take care of you, make sure that you're happy with your purchase. Beyond that, you can find, sealed product, you can find supplies and awesome free content. This is one of my favorite things about CFB going way back. I started reading CFB in like 2009 when I first started playing again.
That's when we launched.
Yeah, and I remember when John Laux was on there, I used to read his stuff, and then eventually he became the co-host of the show, which is kind of cool because I hadn't really met him before. I do remember a long time ago, Luis, he mentioned me in one of his articles because I had played against him at regionals here. I had never made a piece of content or anything like that. I was just playing. But he sort of backhanded criticized my play, which I'm sure was horrendous. I had no idea what I was doing, but yeah, I remember he was playing 5-color control, if you remember that deck from Lorwyn Standard, and I was playing, what was that double strike deck called?
Double strike deck?
Rafika the Many.
Oh, Bant, sure. Bant Heroic or whatever, or Bant, whatever.
Bant
Exalted.
I was playing Bant Exalted, and I, for whatever reason, didn't attack him a lot of times with my Treetop Village, and he thought that was not the right thing to do. Anyway, I'm sure he was right, but the content still rolls on. All these years later on Channel Fireball, you can find content from some of the best players in the world and content creators for that matter over at CFB. So lots to see there.
We actually just, recently a couple months ago launched our Discord. You can go to channelfireball.com/Discord to join. And yeah, folks just hang out there. They talk about Magic, talk about not Magic. It's a good place to kind of just hang out. And Discord's awesome. Just in general, I think Discord, if you haven't used it, it's like kind of like a bunch of different chat rooms. And I'm a member of like 10 different Discords. I think it's pretty neat.
Did you know that we have one?
I did know that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's actually linked in through the Patreon, though anybody can be in it, and you can find.
Oh no, I am. Look, I just opened Discord. I'm in the Limited Resources Discord.
Yes, I know. I added you to it. But yeah, we're actually doing a little bit of a shakeup there. Some of our dedicated listeners are kind of mapping things out. I mean, the truth is that I don't have the bandwidth to figure all that stuff out myself. So it's kind of like one of those things that we like to do on the show, similar to the subreddit and things like that, which is kind of you make it and you let it become what it's going to become or not, either way. But yeah, we have one.
That is a fancy way of saying like, I don't really want to do work on this.
No, I actually would if I had the time, but man, it is those things are. I guess some dedication.
Bonchan's not going to eat itself.
Well, you do have that right. Speaking of the podcast and the Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources is where you can go to find more information about that Discord and about everything else that you can get by being a patron of the show. That's a website that lets you give back to the creators that help, brighten your day. And if we're one of those, well, we encourage you to check out patreon.com/limited resources. Okay. So first things first, I got a couple of Cracker Packs for us here for War, because this is the best time for Cracker Packs, really. This is where you get to really kind of go over a pack and figure out, well, what will we actually do here when it really matters? First card out is Bulwark Giant. That's the 5 and a white 3/6, gains you 5 life. No, I will not be first picking it, though. You can play this card.
So I tend to side this card in more often than play it, just because it does gum up the ground, give you a nice life cushion against the whatever foolish enemy is playing an aggressive deck in this format.
That's right. Another of these type of cards. Yeah, we know, Julie. Kiora's Dambreaker is 5 and a blue for a 5/6 Leviathan, and when it enters the battlefield, you proliferate.
Oh, I like this card. So basically, my power rankings for the 5/6 drops.
Because better be Tidebearer Giant number 1, or I'm done.
There's one in each color. I believe Tidebearer Giant is number 1. I believe the Dambreaker is number 2. Invading Manticore is 3, and then there's a pretty big gap between Bulwark Giant, and then another big gap with Yavimaya Worm.
Oh, I was like, what is the last one? And it's the 7/6. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's the only one without an ability. Like,
right.
So I think it's fairly mediocre.
Yeah, and these are good abilities too. Steady Aim. No, I'm off for this one. This is the 1 in a green instant. Untap a creature, it gets +1/+4 and gains reach. Yep. Charity Extractor. We already talked about the Patreon. Relentless Advance. 3 in a blue. Sorcery, amass 3. Not super impressed by this card. I initially had it tagged as something I wanted to be interested in a blue-red spells deck, because those decks always struggle with this balance between getting enough spells in there, but also having enough creatures to like be able to block or attack or, create a board state of some sort. And this kind of toes that line beautifully. And I'll play it in those decks, don't get me wrong, but I thought it would be even better in those, and it just doesn't seem to be that great.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan, and there's also just a lot of good bounce that tends to make cards like this a lot less good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, those are the cards that I'd rather be picking. Enforcer Griffin, totally playable. 4 and a white for a 3/4, flying, fine.
I don't have a problem with playing Enforcer Griffin, though. I do cut it.
We have finally hit a card worthy of first picking. Jaya's Greeting.
Mm-hmm.
One of the
instant deal 3 to any creature, scry 1. Yeah. I love the card. And it's a really important part of I think my overall favorite deck in the format, the one I've been having the most success with, blue-red spells.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because, I've been drafting a fair bit of that too.
The same goes for spells as it does for creatures, which is a 2-drop spell that's also good in the late game is insane. It's part of the reason that Callous Dismissal we're so high on. We're going to talk about that later. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Jaya's Greeting you can play on turn 2 to kill their 2/2, it's great if you're curving out. Or you can just draw it on turn 10. You're still generally happy to draw it because you will trade for something and get your nice little scry. So
yeah, card's really great. And again, we know that the removal, they've taken a completely different look at the removal in this set, and this is an example of that. Next is Unlikely Aid, which is 1 in a black instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. I have not found a spot for this. Mainly because the decks that I play that are black are not looking to beat down. They're just not. So cards like Combat Tricks usually end up getting pushed to the wayside. And Unlikely Aid, while a fine trick, it actually does the things that we want Combat Tricks to do, which is let you win combat and increase the power of your creature. So it's actually a fine combat trick. For me, it just hasn't found a home yet. Ooh.
I just don't like Combat Tricks in this format. I haven't found a single combat trick that I'm happy to play.
Yeah, I keep getting blown out by Giant Growth because I feel like it's not great in this format. And then people are like, well, it's still Giant Growth. I'm like, yeah, I guess that is a 2-for-1. Another great common here. I don't think it's on Jaya's Greetings power level, but it's Even Eternal. 2 in a blue, 2/2 flyer. You get mass 1. Really good card. I'll take as many of those as I can get my grubby little hands on.
Yeah, I think that most people had this out the gates as the best blue common. I'm starting to think Callous Dismissal might actually be better, funnily enough. Mm-hmm. But I can buy Even Eternal still being the best. I do think Jaya's Greeting is better than all of these cards, though.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely better than Sarkhan's Catharsis, which is 4 in a red instant. Does 5 damage to a player or planeswalker. Get that out of my face. Okay, that brings us to the uncommon. So we've got Jaya's Greeting clearly leading the pack out of the commons. Will one of these uncommons usurp it? It is Sunblade Angel first, which is... By the way, we do not want to put these in the arena. 5 and a white for a 3/3 flying first strike vigilance lifelink that dies to Jaya's Greeting.
Yeah, the fact that this dies to
is powerful.
The fact that it dies to a lot of the common removal is a pretty big downside. This card does generally win you the game if it sticks, especially if you have ways to pump it. Just because it's a 6-point lifespan every time it hits. It often keeps additional things back, and you once you do pump it, it scales really well. Lifelink always basically gives you double value on pump spells. But look at this versus Callous Dismissal, Obnixilus's Cruelty, Spark Harvest, Jaya's Greeting, and it just starts to look Heartfire even. It just starts to look kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, pretty bad. And that's not even the uncommon removal, which also mostly kills it. Next is Emergent Zone. This is a land that taps for colorless. You can pay 1 mana, tap it, and sack it to have spells this turn be able to cast as though they had flash.
Yeah, this card is unplayable. I don't think I've never had a deck where I wanted it.
Yeah, it's just simply not worth the cost of screwing up your mana. Speaking of unplayable, probably Liliana's Triumph, 1 and a black instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. If you have Liliana Planeswalker, they also discard a card. I have seen this played a few times. It did get me, like it's gotten my 2-drop a couple of times, but it has also been horrendous against me a few times where like I sacrificed like a Lazotep Reaver that, was just sitting on the battlefield doing nothing and my opponent just scooped. I would not advise playing Liliana's Triumph.
I do not like, targeted sacrifice effects, like where they just choose and sack a creature very much. And yeah, this is no exception.
Yeah, I mean, it just violates one of the things that is a real red flag on any Magic card, which is if it gives your opponent a choice. If they have a choice, that card is automatically way worse than you'd think it would be.
Well, especially with the mass in this format.
Totally. Oh, I'll sack my 1/1 and it'll be back. Okay, well, we got a real contender here. Our rare is Domri, Anarch of Bolas. So that's 1 red-green for a 3 loyalty Domri. Creatures you control get +1/+0 as his static ability. +1 is add red or green mana. Creature spells you cast this turn can't be countered. And -2 is it lets your a creature you control fight another one.
Domri's good. I think that Domri.
Can I just take Jaya's Greeting?
I'm thinking about it because I think Domri is really strong, but I don't love red-green.
I don't either at all. Like, not at all. And I don't view Domri as a great splash card. So I'm not being like in a black-green deck, which I do like, and then being like, oh, I'm going to splash Domri. Fine, maybe. But that's not really, like, Domri isn't that type of planeswalker. Domri's like, play it on turn 3 and it has a nice effect on the game.
It's now that you mention it, I was about to say, like, yeah, Domri's just better than all the commons and uncommons, but I don't think that's true. And at the beginning of the format, we would think that, when it hadn't done a bunch of drafts, because the effect is more powerful, but now that red-green is worse, and I value staying open in this format quite a bit, if you can, just because you want to be ready to jump ship pack 2 for, when you open a Liliana or whatever. So taking Jaya's Greeting, yeah, you know what? I'm actually just in. Let's just take Jaya's Greeting over Domri and not look back.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. Same thing. And you know what?
I did have a really funny start where I went Plains, a Johnny's Pridemate. My opponent played a 2/2. Next turn, I went Interplanar Beacon, tap it for red-green, play a Domri, gain a life, make it a 3/3, fight your 2/2.
Wait, what? Interplanar what?
The land that taps for colorless and you can pay 1 and tap.
Oh, no way.
and you gain a life when you play a Planeswalker, so it made my pride
That's disgusting. And then you fought. Oh, that is
and then I attack for 4 because Domri gives +1/+0.
Oh, that is disgusting. All right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw an audible at us here, Luis. So we've taken Jaya's Greeting. We're going to just do a little quick pack 1, pick 2 here. So I'm going to...
Yeah, just go through and...
Yeah, I'm going to snipe something from this. I think that's going to be it. Just a quick double check. Yep. All right. So I got it. So you've taken Jaya's Greeting, and now you get past Makeshift Battalion, 2 and a white, 3/2. Whenever it attacks with 2 other creatures, it gets a counter.
Nope.
Contentious Plan. I like this one. 1 and a blue sorcery, proliferate, draw a card.
Yeah, I like proliferate. I like Contentious Plan, and I like blue-red, but I don't think I would take. I would hope not to take Contentious Plan second.
Yeah, for sure. Samut's Sprint, another combat trick. We don't really like those very much. What do you think about Martyr for the Cause? 1 and a white, 2/2. When it dies, proliferate.
I find it to be totally playable. I think white is the worst color, and it's by enough of a margin that I tend not to want to first pick white cards. But I've never found a deck where I was unhappy with Martyr, because either you're playing aggro and a 2-mana 2/2 is basically what you want to begin with, plus a little bit of value, or you're playing a deck where you can really take advantage of the proliferate. Yeah,
I've found it to be right in the middle on playable. Vampire Opportunist, I have not been happy with. 1 and a black for a 2/1. You can pay 6 and a black to drain your opponent for 2. I thought this would be fine, but even in the decks that I play that have black, like black, blue, or black, green, I have not been happy with the Opportunist. Same thing with Vivian's Grizzly, our next card, 2 and a green for a 2/3. You can pay 4 mana, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature or planeswalker, you can reveal it and put it in your hand. You know, I'll tell you what, man, the 4 mana is just too much. I just feel like I can't sit there and activate that card. Now, I'm not saying I never have. I have hit late game scenarios where I've been able to activate this card and have it matter, but it is rare and it is so slow that I do not value it highly. Like, I have this card way down on my list from where you would have asked me at the beginning.
Yeah, I agree. I have not found it to be worth doing, and I just think the card just doesn't. I'm not really that interested in either of its modes. 3 mana 2/2 is just not good stats, and 4 mana to draw half a card is also just not really where I want to be. So
right.
I'm pretty off the Grizzly.
Vampire Opportunist is the one I mentioned before. This one's perhaps even lower on my scale, which is Duskmantle Operative. 1 and a black 2/2 can't be blocked with creature's power 4 or greater. This is just not what I want to be doing in my black decks again. And I'll touch on this a little later in the show too, but the black decks I've been playing have been either ramp or control decks, and none of them have been beating down. I haven't found red black to be where I want to be at all. And so Duskmantle Operative is just kind of off my radar.
No, I think the card is quite bad.
Yeah. Now, Snare Spinner is a card I've been playing a lot. That's 1 and a green for the 1/3 with reach. And whenever it blocks a creature with flying, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. I like this guy. This is a kind of defensive 2-drop I want in my deck.
Yeah, I like Snare Spinner. I almost always start 1. I don't usually like starting 2 because when they're bad, they are pretty bad. But against, I would say 3/4 of the decks, I end up being pretty happy with it.
Yeah, for sure. This guy I've not been happy with either. Prismite, I've yet to put this in my deck. 2 mana, 2/1. You can pay 2 mana to filter.
No, it's like
it's really bad.
The 5th worst, 5-color fixer.
Yeah, it's just terrible. Herald of the Dreadhorde, 3 and a black for a 3/2. When it dies, you amass 2. Fine, right? This card's like, it makes the cut occasionally, but certainly nothing that we're going to be taking for our Jaya's Greeting pack here. And by the way, that was not good. Like those like right now, Contentious Plan is where I'm at. Oof.
Yeah, I guess that is where we're at.
So let's get some better uncommons. All right, there we go. We did it. Flux Channeler, 2 and a blue for a 2/2. Like whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you proliferate. Yeah, and it's good with Jaya's Greeting. So that would be my pick currently. Next, where are you at on Teo the Shield Mage? 2 and a white, 5 loyalty. You have hexproof, -2, make an 0/3 wall.
I just keep hearing, Dynamite in my head whenever we talk about Teo. But in any case, I think Teo the Shield Mage is not good in most decks, but there are some decks where he ends up being pretty good. I basically like him once I'm in the Super Friends deck where I have like 4 or 5 other Planeswalkers because.
Okay.
And ideally proliferate because those decks tend to want that also. Because then Teo throws a lot of garbage in the way of the opponent. And if you can proliferate even once, you get an additional shield, and twice you get an additional shield, and Teo stays in play. So I would almost never take Teo early, but if I'm already in the blue-white deck and I have like a Narset and a Dovin, and maybe one other Planeswalker, like a Tameo, like I'm like some kind of Bantish deck. At that point, Teo gets a lot more appealing because turn 3 Teo into turn 4 Planeswalker that gives you advantage. Well, it means you're going to get multiple activations out of that Planeswalker under most circumstances.
Yeah. Teo to me is like a bad Lazotep Reaver. Basically, we have a new world now where we have Planeswalkers at uncommon that don't really do that much. And we need to adjust to that because I still have this visceral reaction whenever I see any Planeswalker in a pack, like, oh God, a Planeswalker. Like it could, that could be a game winning. This is a minimal impact card. It just doesn't do that much, right? It's not that it's terrible. It just doesn't have a major impact on the board. Its general use case is that it makes 2 0/3s. That's what it does. It gives you hexproof, which doesn't come up very often. No, it just doesn't do that much, And that's not saying that it's unplayable. It's just a weird thing to have to make a mental shift on.
Well, basically, cards that don't do that much, like you said, are only good if you're utilizing those resources. And if you have a bunch of cards that snowball out of control, like Tameo, like Narset, if you have like a Teferi or a Jace, and even going to non-rares, if you have like a Kasmina, all those cards give you so much more value if they stick around, and you can afford to kind of throw away a card or use a card less good with Tameo, with a Teo, because you're drawing so many cards off your other effects. It's the same reason that once you have 4 or 5 good card draw spells, 2 mana bounce, no other effect is going to be a little more appealing. You can afford to throw away a card if you're drawing 3 cards a turn. And at that point, because in most games of limited, you're bound on cards more than tempo. And once the cards equation starts getting higher and higher and higher, the more tempo becomes worth to you because you want to balance those two things. Mm-hmm. So, basically it's a long-winded way of saying Teo's good if you have recurring sources of card advantage, especially Planeswalkers, which are the most likely source of card advantage in this format. And or if you're a sacrifice deck. That's actually the other thing. If you're like a black-white deck with 2 Cruel Celebrants and 2 Spark Reapers, Teo's like insane.
Oh yeah, that's good. Just making 2 bodies is just automatically good.
Totally. So
and it's actually 3 for Spark Reaper, right?
You can eat Teo. So Teo has some potential, but is not a card you want to take this early. Like I'm definitely on Flux Channeler right now.
For sure. Our rare is Parhelion 2. That's the 8 mana, 6 white, 5/5 flying first strike vigilance legendary vehicle. Whenever it attacks, you get 2 4/4 angels, and the crew cost is 4. Look, this is a game winner. If you ever get to attack with it, but it's 8 mana with a crew cost of 4. That is asking quite a bit of setup.
It's one of the best green finishers in the set.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's just a great place to put 8 mana, right? Like you can win the game off of it. But I don't know. To me, like cards like this are fine. You can pick them up if you are playing the big green ramp deck and just splash around or whatever. But I would take Flux Channel out of this pack. Yeah. No question. Yeah.
I don't think it's actually very close.
No, it's not even close. Oppo took Prison Realm.
Yep, I would take Prison Realm first.
Yep. Okay, so there's that. Or the Spark Crack-a-Packs done. Now let's get into a few of the cards that I've seen some discussion about, or I've had discussions about, or I've had some thoughts on, and you have as well. And then we'll talk about the other stuff after. First things first, got some thoughts on Ugin's Conjurant.
Ugin's, right?
Ugin's Conjurant. We gave it a good grade. Remember, we had a discussion about it during the set review, and we decided, this card's actually quite strong. And even though it has a downside of, sort of remembering its damage, the upside that it has of being formed basically entirely of +1/+1 counters in a set with so much proliferate is really high. Also, flexibility and size, you're kind of always getting a good rate. It's interesting to me because while I really like the card and think it's really strong, I'm actually finding it really annoying that it exists. And the reason is because it's colorless and flexible. And I feel like I need to take it over kind of everything, not literally, right? Like there's bombs and stuff that I would take over it, but like there aren't that many. Are there any commons I would take over it? I don't think there are. Like,
yeah. So what you're expressing that I agree with is it's less interesting when it's almost an auto pick, and it's so funny because. And this is going to be a mini rant, so bear with me.
No, do it. Let it go, man.
I was drafting on Gabby Spartz's stream like 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. And Ugin's Conjurant was in the pack, and I'm like, oh yeah, this card's great. We should take it. And she was like, well, at least YouTube will maybe believe you because you said it. Because the last time she took it, everyone on YouTube was like, this card's horrible. Why did you take it?
Oh, God.
Which that has some underlying problems too, of course. Right. But the point is, and I've kind of gone into this on my stream, which I've started to stream more, by the way.
Twitch.tv/LSV.
Oh, yeah. But the reason is I've said this before because when it comes up, again, people still just underrate this card. I think that's going to change. I think in a couple weeks, the word will get out because every time Conjurant comes up on any stream, people talk about, oh, wow, you're going to take Conjurant over Callous Dismissal, or you're going to take Conjurant over Band Together or something like that, which those picks aren't even close.
Right.
Conjurant is colorless. It is flexible. The fact that it can be a 2-drop or a 7-drop or anything between is really good. And the fact that Proliferate is just so easy to do in this set is just so impactful that Conjurant is just, rapidly becoming one of my favorite cards. And yes, I believe it is better pick one, pack one than any common, which is pretty crazy because a lot of people read this card and think it's unplayable. Like they think it's actually bad.
Right.
Which I guess is the mark of a well-designed card in some respects. Like it's good to have some stumpers in the set. Yeah. It's definitely good to have some Jaya's Greetings and Ob Nixilis's Cruelties. So people look at them, they're like, yep, this is good. And I know I'm supposed to take it. It's also good to have some nice stumpers. And Ugin's Conjurant is definitely a stumper just based on the just kind of how I've seen people act about it.
Unless, of course, you're an extremely intelligent, limited resources listener, in which case you would have heard us give it a B or something like that in the review.
Right, but it's probably even better than we initially thought.
Yeah, it is probably. Yeah, it's just interesting because the closest comparison I have for this are Moxen in the Vintage Cube. Which it's obviously not on that power level, but it feels similar when I open it. I'm like, look, Ugin's Conjurant is a cool card, but it's not that cool, right? It's just power and toughness, right? It's like it doesn't really make me excited to be like, hey, look, power and toughness, that's it. Proliferate aside. Yet I still feel compelled to take it. Similarly to when I open up a Mox and I'm like, it's not that it just makes mana, like it's just a kind of a boring effect, right? It isn't like an exciting effect on the board or whatever. It's the same thing that a basic land does. Of course, it's completely broken, so I have to take it and it's colorless. And I feel similarly. I don't like those type of things where it's just like a non-pick.
Right. When you're drafting red, blue, and cube, because that's the best color combination, so you're probably drafting it, and you open a Mox Pearl in pack 3 and you have to take it over like Vendilion Click. It's not that fun.
No, it's not.
You're supposed to, so you do, but it's not that fun.
Yeah. So Conjurant, though, is really good, and you should be playing it probably more often than you do. Next, I put up a tweet last week saying that at that point, I was actually valuing Spark Harvest more than Omnixilus's Cruelty. And
that was easy bait.
And I was surprised by that. I know I still, when I'm drafting, I'm like, so there's a few things that I wanted to bring up about this for starters. I didn't expect that to be the case at all. But one thing is that from a practical perspective, I don't think that they're ever in the pack together. Like I haven't seen a pack with them together.
The common runs, for those who don't know what that means, cards aren't fully random. They're collated such that there's a bit of a color distribution. And the best way to do that, I guess for digital, it actually doesn't matter as much, but they do mimic real life where printing presses make it most feasible to have groups of cards, that tend to be together because that's just easier to collate.
Yeah.
And what that means is you're never going to have these two cards in the same pack.
Yeah. Right. And so what that means, from this perspective as well, you don't really have to make that decision during the course of a draft. So it's kind of like, it's more just like a theoretical thing where you're going, I was saying I didn't really think that I would value one higher than the other. But I've thought about it some more, and I think that they're extremely close. Like they're both excellent cards. But I think part of the reason that brought me to that mind state is the black decks that I'm playing, as I mentioned earlier, tend to be controlling or slow or wanting to ramp or just basically get to a later part of the inevitable part of the game for me rather than an aggressive one. Now, both of these decks do well under that circumstance. But what I'm most concerned about in that scenario is stalling out the board. So I'm playing Lazotep Reavers and I'm just blocking and Death Touchers and all this stuff like that on the ground. And so how do I lose a game from that standpoint? There's two ways. One of them is a flyer, and the other one is a planeswalker. And a flyer will kill you, but it usually takes a while. A planeswalker, a rare one especially, or above, if left unchecked, the game can end very quickly. And I found that for those type of decks, and again, those are the type of decks that I'm drafting if I'm drafting black, at least so far in the format, I need to be able to kill a planeswalker, because you know what's not good at killing planeswalker? Lazotep Reaver and 2/2 Death Touchers and stuff. They are very good at keeping your planeswalkers alive, but they're very bad at killing your opponent's planeswalker. So Cruelty, is a much better answer for creatures because it's instant speed and because it's cheaper, right? It isn't unconditional, but you don't have to sacrifice one of your own creatures. Also, in addition to all of this, I've also found that I do tend to have expendable creatures lying around. So I can occasionally pay the alternate cost on the Spark Harvest of just paying the one black mana and sacrificing a creature. And that is a way that if I need to, I can kill the thing earlier. So it is kind of interesting because I think it takes a certain set of circumstances for me to get to the point where these two cards are even, neck and neck, let alone I'm thinking that Spark Harvest is something that I value. Like my first Spark Harvest is something I value more than my first Obnixilus's Cruelty, for example. But I think that those circumstances are here, and I think that they're really close. I don't know where I'll be by the end of the format, but I'm still more worried about planeswalkers than I am about your creatures.
I mean, It is very close. Where I'm at is I would rather have the first cruelty, but I'd rather have a spark harvest over the second cruelty, which means that they got to be pretty close if that's the case.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
But I also tend not to want to bait Twitter with controversial picks for the sake of controversy.
A, that's not what I was doing. And B,
Marshall
yes,
wants to becomes the BuzzFeed of Magic Twitter. No, I would never stoop to such a level.
should we do top 5 worst somethings?
I actually filmed that video today.
I'll help you come up with a clickbait title for it. What about the bombs? You know, one thing that you expressed, and I have also is, you know, we both noted, I mean, you came up with a new name for this type of format. Before we had Prince and Pauper that we got from BDM, and now there's King format as well.
We never hit an Emperor format.
Yeah, seriously. But we've also kind of like had conversations outside of the show where we're both like, but I'm kind of enjoying playing all these super powerful cards, it's particularly on Arena. Where we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. I have that as a specific talking point, but basically, you know, we've had our hands on a lot of really powerful bombs, and yeah, it doesn't feel good if your opponent plays one and you don't, and the game just sort of ends on the spot. But the removal's pushed, and I've been playing a lot of bombs too, so I don't know, maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah, I think I've come down a little bit on how beatable the bombs are. Like, look, don't get me wrong. There are more than I would choose if I was designing my optimal limited format. But yeah, sometimes you can just callous dismissal, you know, their Ilorg or Ronus or whatever, and beat them because you already have enough pressure out, or because you're using Narset and Tamiya's Epiphany and you're drawing a bunch of cards and you can just trade 2 mana a turn for their 5 mana. Like, I did beat literally Ilharg on turn 5 by just having enough card draw and using Totally Lost and Callous Dismissals to basically they just kept replaying their turn. Basically every turn was playing a 5 mana 6/6 trample, the same one. Mm-hmm. And what I was doing was just better than that with a combination of commons and uncommons, which is kind of neat, you know?
Yeah. So the real question is, where is that line now, right? Because if they were all just unbeatable, it still wouldn't be fun, because there's just too many draws where you either don't get one or don't have one in your draw and your opponent plays one and then the game ends. And, you know, to me, like, I had a game at a local game store that was similar to this, where there was, like, I had a really strong draw. I mean, I had Ugin's, why do I keep calling it? I have Ugin's Conjurant. I also had Totally Lost.
Don't you not only have a pronunciation guide, but are the person on commentary responsible for doing such?
I am. Yeah, I am. I think it's because of the word Conjurant. I think I'm like getting it anyway. And I also had Ugin, like the Planeswalker card, and I was going to be able to curve like removal spell with a 2-drop and stuff into it, and my opponent played a Ketra. And I was like, well, crap. Like, what am I going to do here? And so I took a different line where I tried to dig for a counter spell and then tried to use it Totally Lost, but none of these things would actually work the way I wanted them to. And my opponent just untapped and played 2/2-drops, and the game was over, you know, because they went from having a 3/6 double striker with some random creatures to having 4 power from the 2/2-drops and 8 power from the tokens on that turn. And I'm like, well, this game's just completely over, even though I had one of the more powerful cards in the format and a good hand to go along with it. Those games suck, right? And I have always been of the mindset that it sucks both ways, because you know what I did? I conceded, right? I picked up my cards. I was like, this game's over. You literally have lethal next turn and I have no outs. So even for my opponent, who was like, you know, obviously sweet, I open in a Ketra, I get to play a Ketra, I'm doing it. It's just the game just ends, right? It's just over. It's not, there's nothing interesting or fun about that going forward. That level to me is too high. And I do think that the gods are too much, you know, you know, for the format.
I think Oketra actually is the specific one that I am worried about, because
same.
She generates so much value when left unchecked. Whereas at the end of the day, Ronus and Ilharg are both just kind of dorks. There's some big pigs and
Kefnet is to a point as well.
Well, Kefnet's a flyer, and if you ever spike a spell with Kefnet, the game's just over.
Yes,
so
that is true.
I think Kefnet is probably second in ridiculousness, and then Bantu is quite good, but Bantu's more good on turn 8 or 9 than turn 5. I mean, sometimes you'll have a turn 5 Bantu with Lazotep Reaver and just really go off, but Bantu is, again, a bit later, so you have time to set up and end up in a decent spot. So I think it's mainly Oketra, but also Kefnet. basically, the bombs are still higher than I would like. So let's not pretend that, all of a sudden this is all solvable and the format is perfect. But it is also a little better than I thought it would be based on early games of the format.
Yeah. So this brings up a question and an interesting talking point because look, let's say a Ketra is a card that is going to be fine in standard. Like, I don't know if that's the case, but let's just
she is.
Okay. So
no, she's actually quite good.
Okay. So there you go. So a Ketra, good for standard, a powerful card, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so if I work at R&D, I'm like, well, we want this card for standard. The problem is we have to put it into a booster pack. And the booster pack is the same thing that we use for drafting. So it has to be in the limited format. Now, you can look, if you are having to juggle all of these things at once, you can kind of hand wave it and say, look, it's a mythic rare. Sorry. Like sometimes there's some really powerful mythic rares and you're going to lose to them in limited, live with it. Fine. That's fair enough. I would probably do the same thing. But let's look at it under a different paradigm. If you were only designing a set for limited, you had no considerations other than making the best limited format, you would never put Oketra in a booster pack, right?
I don't think so, no.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, your game designer, look, I wouldn't. Like, it's just an unfun...
No, I don't. I wouldn't want to say just no. Like,
okay.
Basically, it is good to have some I win mythics.
Okay, but maybe we could win by making 2/2s and not 4/4s with vigilance, or maybe we could have 5 toughness, so it could actually be killed by 1 common removal spell.
I don't think that's a big difference. Like, yes.
But you would make those changes at least theoretically for limited, right? Like
the change I would make to Oketra is that I would not make, and this goes to all the gods. Yeah. I would not make them come back from exile. Yeah. I find that distasteful from a game design perspective and a balance perspective.
Right. That I think is just bad. Like, I think it breaks. I don't want to overstate this, but I do think it breaks sort of a contract you have with the players, right? Where you say, we're going to make a thing called remove from the game entirely. And then for brevity's sake, we're going to change it to remove from the game. And then for flavor/brevity's sake, we're going to change it to exile, which is a lot more nebulous of a term. These all made sense. I really liked the term exile. That made sense to me. But now it's just another zone, right? It is not removed from the game entirely.
That's the problem I have, is that it's turning exile from exile to just like graveyard number 2.
Right. To somewhere else. Yeah.
When you first look at Obnixilus's cruelty and look at Kefnet, and you're like, I got you. And then you're like, wait, no, this doesn't work. Wait, I thought the whole reason that we have stuff like this is so that we can do that.
Yes.
And it's just like complete nonsense.
Yes. So, but here's the thing with my example about if you were designing the set without regard, you would take away the exile thing, but I'm letting you do whatever you want. Like, I'm not saying you can only change one thing about the card. I would have to think that you would change more than that about a card like a Ketra. I mean, this is just not a fun card. Like, you can have super powerful without that powerful.
I would without getting into the nitty-gritty too much, I think I would dial down Ketra just a little bit. Probably make it so Ketra did not have the exile clause and was maybe like, I don't know, probably like a 3/5 that makes 3/3s or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
I also kind of like when a 3 power creature makes 3/3s. It just kind of feels right. Mm-hmm. So, also, I don't know why the zombie tokens have vigilance. That also doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. They're just excellent. Yeah. But I do find it interesting to think about that, because we live in a world where, especially with physical cards, the people in R&D are working under a lot of constraints. I mean, they have to also, I'm sure, consider things like Commander. Now they have, sets that are dedicated to that, but still, I mean, they want to put some cool legendaries in a set so that Commander players can go, hey, this could be my new Commander. They're trying to really keep a lot of balls in the air when it comes to these sets. And this is one that I'm happy to take for the team. Sure. Oketra is too good. Fine. Right. Like it's worth it if it's going to be good in standard, or if there's other uses for it. And it is a mythic, so it doesn't come up that much. But, I will say it does make me think, I wonder what limited would look like if the booster packs only contained cards meant for limited, and they could put the cards for standard or other things, if you could acquire those other ways. But that is not the world we live in. So we have to try to fight Oketra sometimes. Ugin. I just wanted to mention Ugin. We loved Ugin in the set review, and this card has been, it's really kind of pushed it. Like, I think that Ugin is one of the best protects itself planeswalkers we've ever had. It has the two abilities that I would want the most in limited, and it has one of the sweetest versions of one of the abilities. So one of them is to basically kill something. Okay, that's fine. And that's a pretty straightforward one. It has a minor condition that it has to have a color, but whatever. So that's great. Check that box. But the other way that planeswalkers protect themselves is by making creatures or by making things that block or whatever. And Ugin does this in a really powerful way. The 2/2 that you get is already quite good because it's a 2/2, and a lot of these ones, if you think way back to the original one that did this, which was Elspeth, Knight Errant, made 1/1s. This one makes 2/2s, which are great, but also simultaneously draws you cards by giving you those cards whenever they leave the battlefield for any reason. So even a chump block is like draw a card.
Here's the part that makes me feel a little better about it. Ugin's seeing a decent amount of play in Standard. There's a bunch of different decks playing Ugin.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay.
Oh yeah, Ugin is a key part of like the kind of Bant mid range, the like blue white Super Friends. I wouldn't be surprised to show up in some of the Esper lists from now and then, and because it is really powerful. And I always feel better when these cards show up in Constructed, because then they feel like they're actually accomplishing something.
Me too. Seriously, it makes me feel way better. Now, this is kind of interesting, though. So Ugin, great. One of the best limited cards we've had in a while, especially at colorless. Nicol Bolas, on the other hand, this has been interesting. So I have played Nicol Bolas twice now, splashing both times, and in decks it was pretty trivial to actually get Nicol Bolas down. You know, I got to say two things. One, I was a little underwhelmed. Powerful card. No, I'm not trying to say it's bad, but it was a little underwhelming given the lengths you have to go mana-wise to get that thing on the battlefield. And I'd rather just have Ugin. Like, I think Ugin's just better. Like, and I don't mean for the mana cost. I mean, I think it's just better. Yeah.
Ugin is a stronger card, and Nicol Bolas is harder to cast. Also, the line of text where it has all the other Planeswalker abilities, like it's better than almost all the other Planeswalker abilities, so it doesn't really come up either.
No, it does look cool on Arena. I had one with two Planeswalkers on the other side, and there's this huge like horizontal list that you get to choose from. But like you said, Nicol Bolas' baseline abilities are better than almost all the others anyway. But anyway, I did find that interesting that even just in a vacuum, when you don't take color considerations in, I think I'd rather have Ugin. So props to the Oog Dad. Very effable, as it were. Green-white proliferate.
Yeah, I think green-white proliferate is a lot worse than it looked initially.
Dude, I can't ever get it to work.
I know. My team thought it was good. When we laid out all the color pairs that was in like the top half, the more I draft it, the more it just keeps moving down, and including, unfortunately, at the Mythic Championship itself. Catgate lives on. Basically, green-white proliferate is a synergy deck, but it's the worst of all worlds, which is a synergy beatdown deck where you need to draw your cards in the right order and combination, and they get worse as the game goes on, and it gets broken apart by removal just way too effectively. You might have even seen this game on camera when I went turn 1 Charmstray, turn 2 a Johnny's Pridemate, and Ken Yukihiro just goes, Jai is greeting your Pridemate. And it's like, wow, that was my nut draw, and now I have a 1/1. I had a Grateful Apparition in hand. It just did nothing to proliferate onto. And I've just drafted the deck probably like 3 or 4 more times since. And on Arena, my average wins is about 3, which for Arena is not very good. So I'm pretty off the deck. I've started to devalue Pledge of Unity and Grateful Apparition, other cards that I thought initially were quite high picks.
Same. And it's weird because on paper, it still looks good. All the pieces are there. It just seems too disruptible. I
mean, you just have these games where you go like 2-drop, 3-drop, play another thing, go Pledge of Unity, Pollen Bright Druid, and you're just like, wow, this deck's great. Then they're like, totally lost your biggest creature, and Callous Dismissal, your other thing. And then all of a sudden, you're just replaying your 1/1s or 2/2s, and they just don't do anything.
Yeah,
so the removal is just so abundant in the set. We talked about it, how much good removal there is. And you're just very vulnerable to bounce as well. So, and your cards coming in the wrong order hurt you a lot more. You don't have card draw, so you can't really protect yourself from flood. Another thing I've noticed is you almost always want to play New Horizons, which put it on your land to get a +1/+1 counter, and it taps for 2 mana. But that just means you're playing 17 land and 1 or 2 New Horizons. So all of a sudden you have like 19 mana sources in your deck, and that also is bad news because it means when you draw 1 too many lands, then draw this as New Horizons as one of your spells in the mid game. It's just like you drew a land.
Yeah.
And
I'm willing to take on the risk that you mentioned about having the draw not be sequentially lined up occasionally. If when it does line up, I'm a huge favorite and it's just been too interruptible. That isn't the case. So you can't have both, Magic. if I'm going to play the risky deck, it better get there when it gets there. And this one
right. And this kind of dovetails into white in general being pretty bad. Even though white, on paper, white's commons are comparable to other colors, but the fact that like Trusted Pegasus and Pouncing Lynx and just cards like that are just basically unplayable, or at least mediocre outside of aggressive decks, means that you'll be drafting white. And first of all, sometimes you won't end up with an aggressive enough deck, so you'll have some wasted picks there, or cards that don't fit perfectly. And aggressive decks are just kind of bad in this format. I have not found them to be impressive. So I think white really hurts, misses out where, yes, sometimes you just end up with a good white-blue deck that has, some elite guild mages, whatever it's called, the 2/3 flyer that gains 3 and draws a card.
Guard mage.
And Guard mage, yeah. And you have like Divine Arrow and a Grateful Apparition and some blue planeswalkers, and you're like, I've got a decent blue-white deck going. But then you just look at a lot of the beatdown creatures, they just don't fit in this deck.
Yep.
And it is just, I think white's the worst color, and it's by enough of a margin that like I would take a comparable or slightly worse other colored card over a white card. Yes, I would still take Prison Realm over Flux Channeler, pick one, pack one, because Realm is good and splashable. But I'm going to take like Callous Dismissal over Trusted Pegasus, and I don't think that's particularly close. Or I'd take Tamiyo's Epiphany over Trusted Pegasus. And, I don't think white is very good in this format.
Yeah, this set is a very classic draft a plan, not a card type thing. Because again, the Pegasus is still a very solid card on its own. It's just doesn't go into too many plans.
It's good at killing planeswalkers. That part I like. But
that too.
On the other hand, Blue Red and Blue Red X have both been very good. Mostly just Blue Red base because there's a lot of good card advantage sources. There's the planeswalkers like Kasmina and Narset are both uncommons and really powerful. Saheeli also gives you advantage as the game goes on. Tamiyo's Epiphany is great. Honor the God Pharaoh is great because it lets you protect yourself from flood. And then it has a lot of good cheap removal between like Jaya's Greeting, Heartfire, which I'll talk about later, Callous Dismissal. And you just end up in a deck that just hums pretty nicely on commons and uncommons, and then has access, just like every other color, to a lot of good rares.
One question about Honor the God Pharaoh you mentioned. By the way, that's the 2 in a red, discard a card, draw 2.
It's Tormenting Voice plus amass 1. Discard a card, draw 2, amass 1.
How many? I've been playing one quite happily, but I'm a little nervous about the second one because it's a lot of air if you draw both. Are you running 2 or like is there 3?
I would always run 2.
2? Really?
Easily, because it doesn't put you behind on board because it makes a 1/1.
I mean, like I get what you're saying, but a 1/1's not.
No, there's a lot of things to do with a 1/1.
No, I know. I'm just saying you can still be behind on board even after having made a 1/1. Like,
yes, but this format's not super fast, and it makes up for itself by getting that 1/1 a lot of the time.
It does.
Also, if you draw 2, you can just discard 1 to the other one. Like that is relevant, Okay. It really smooths out your draws. I found it to be quite good. There's also so many spells matter things. Yeah. So having a card that triggers your like Saheeli, Burning Prophet, Spellgorger Weird, while also giving you a body is nice. Also, it's where you want to start for your like Flux Channeler or Contentious plans for proliferating.
Sure.
Because once you get that amass token, it just keeps growing. I tend not to play 3, and it's not, I just don't have 3 in my pool very often because once I have 2, I don't value the third one very highly. But I could see playing 3 in a deck. Like there's decks that would want that. And part of which is Heartfire. The reason I wanted to mention this card is, this is a 1 in a red instant, sack a creature or planeswalker to deal 4 to any target. I thought this card might be a synergy card you sometimes included in like black-red. I have played 2 main deck in almost every deck every red deck that I've had.
Really powerful card, yeah.
Well, it's a powerful card if you can get it to work, and the combination of Honor the God Pharaoh, other amass like Even Eternal or Callous Dismissal, whatever, or Lazotep Reaper if you're black, plus Tybalt is by far the best enabler because he makes 2 devils and you can just sack the Tybalt. And Tybalt's Rager, you end up, it just has felt pretty free to Heartfire, and Saheeli is great at that too. Like, I have never run into a deck where I'm like playing Heartfire and feeling like, wow, I really shouldn't have played this. Like, yes, 3 is probably more than most decks would want. Again, I don't tend to just pick the 3rd in the draft, but I've been super happy having 2. Okay. Also, sometimes you just burn your opponent out.
That happens a lot. I fear that card now.
You're just like, oh, I can just attack with everything and then double Heartfire them, sacking 2 devils, and that's 10 damage right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it adds up really quickly, yeah.
I mean, this is a little bit of TRGR, the rich get richer, but Ral is great with Heartfire. You don't have to sack. When you copy with Ral, you don't have to sack a second creature.
Yeah, so you get the full 8 damage. Actually, it's even more with Ral. Yeah, wow.
It's 10 because of Ral's passive.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
I also wanted to explain that when I say Blue-Red X, the X actually can go onto almost any 2-color deck because Guild Globe and Gateway Plaza are colorless, and so is Mana Geode. So I tend to use free picks, like when you see them late, to pick up Guild Globe Plaza and Mana Geode, and then once I have a good splash card, I very aggressively do. Like if you're blue-green and you open Ral, you just take Ral because Ral's such a busted card that if you can pick up like 3 to 4 of these colorless fixers, you can easily play Ral. Even on like two fixers, it's usually worth it. And Ral could stand in for any single color card.
Yeah, I particularly like the Guild Globe, especially in the blue-red deck because it satisfies that
triggers
non-creature.
It's non-creature spell.
It's just a cantrip. It's just 2 colorless mana to trigger all your stuff, and then if you happen to be splashing, it'll enable that too.
Yeah. So Guild Globe is the best of those, but even Gateway Plaza is fine, especially if you don't have tons of 2-drops. Mana Geode is the worst of them, though. If you have a lot of like 5-drops, it becomes a little more valuable.
Yeah, I figure that's one that's just you'll know if you want to ramp or not.
Yeah, I have found Invade the City, the 1 blue-red, amass X or X the number of spells in your graveyard, just to be bad. It's really bad. It's not worth the work. Like if you have 15 to 17 spells, if you end up with like the nut spell deck, sure. Like this card is a 3-mana 5/5 on turn 7, but for the most part, it's worse than Relentless Advance, and that's not a card I prioritize.
Yeah, it's weird how similar it is too, and how it can just be actually worse in many scenarios.
Yeah. I love Callous Dismissal.
Oh yeah.
We were talking earlier that we might be the best blue common. I think that there's an argument for it over Aven Eternal, and I think as much as I like Tamiyo's Epiphany, I think that's a solid third. I've just found that there's enough ways to get card advantage that having Callous Dismissal as a way to stay at even or ahead on board is really powerful. Plus, it's any permanent, so any non-land permanent, so you can bounce your own Planeswalker to reset it. You can bounce our Prison Realm if you want to unlock something. Obviously, it kills our mass token. It just does so much for so little mana that I have just gotten more and more impressed. I always want 2 in all my blue decks.
Yeah, I love that card. I absolutely love it. Yeah, you mentioned killing the what's it called? The army tokens is just big too. I mean, sometimes people put serious resources into building up one of those, and you're just like, yeah, get rid of it.
Yeah. So, some more individual cards. Totally Lost, I think, is really good. It's better than it's ever been, I think, because of the proliferate sort of thing going on where people are putting counters on their stuff. It's actually even good against the Amass token if they do a lot of work there. Because remember, the first token's essentially free. But once you add more counters to it by playing other Amass cards, then if they play 3 Amass cards and then you kill the token, they generally have not gotten 3 cards worth of value out of their Lazotep Reaver, even Eternal and Callous Dismissal or whatever.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You really can erase a lot of work. Also, it's a primary game plan for some decks to build up a big one and kill you.
Once again, I'm just going to hit this note again, as we did in the set review. Draw Step is a really common play for Totally Lost, because when you want to bounce their Planeswalker, you want to make it so they don't draw the Planeswalker next turn, so you don't want to do it on your turn, but you also don't want to let them use it. So you go to their Draw Step, you bounce their Planeswalker, they don't use it that turn, then they don't draw it till the turn after.
Yeah, I had a sweet one. My opponent had played the 4/5 red 6-drop that amasses 2, and I needed to get rid of it. And on their turn, main phase, they played Narset and Minus, and I totally lost it the 4/5 response.
That's gas.
Yeah, it was sweet.
I think Sorin's Thirst sucks. The black deal.
Yeah, you're really down on it, right?
Well, I mean, we were looking at the comments when we were making notes for the show because we spent hours preparing for each show. And I counted 8 or 9 black commons that are better, and we maybe disagreed on the 9th. So I'll even go back and say them.
Yeah.
Eight of the Fallen was the one we disagreed with, and I think that there's an argument there. I'm not saying it for sure is better than Soren, but I think it's pretty clear that, let's see.
It was Herald of the Dread Horde.
Herald of the Dread Horde might be the last one also. But, I mean, Lazotep Reaver, Obnixlus's Cruelty, Spark Harvest, Spark Reaver, Tidebearer Giant, Toll of the Invasion, my vote for still most underrated card, and Vraska's Finisher are like all better than Soren's Thirst.
Yeah, they are. And they are. Because I was like saying, well, I don't think it's that bad. But then also he listed like 7 or 8 cards in black that were better.
Yeah. And also Soren's Thirst, you know, it just runs out of targets too easily. And if you don't have black in the first 4 turns, it often is just stranded in your hand at the time when you need it the most. So in your 10 swamp decks, I would play it. I'm not saying I never pick the card. I just pick it less than so many of the other commons that you end up in this spot where if you value it less than other people, or in the case of Arena, than the bots, you tend not to get very many of them because you're just not willing to third pick it and everyone else is. So when are you getting your Soren's Thirsts?
Right. By the way, Lazotep Reaver is probably going to be my most drafted common.
I do love the Reaver. I
love it. I think it's amazing.
I do not fear the Reaver.
No, it does everything I want. Okay. Oh, and then the one last thing that I wanted to touch on as far as the sort of random war topics was about the complexity in the format. You know, people were complaining or at least noticing early how complex it is. And you know what? It is. It really has proven to be that when you put static abilities on every planeswalker and you know, so many of the planeswalkers are frequently played and just sit on the battlefield, that it actually does ramp up the complexity a lot. For me, though, I don't mind it because I actually like to see like a wide range of format styles. Like I don't mind seeing some core sets that are a little more bare bones down to the basics. And I don't mind it if they push it every once in a while and see a little more overly complex one like this one. I'm actually fine with it. But I think it is worth noting that this is significantly more complex. It is so often that I'm many
drafts in, and I'm someone who is pretty good at like technical play. I still run into like, oh yeah, Kasmina, I can't make this line of play.
Yeah, can't do that. Yeah. It happened to me last night. I was playing on Arena and I made 2 separate plays that were both plays I wouldn't have made. They weren't disasters, but they were choices I would not have made because Jaya was on the battlefield.
Oh, and it makes all your opponent's stuff do +1 damage.
Yeah, and it was like it turned into a trade that I didn't expect, and you know I was just and they used a removal spell, and I thought, oh well, they're going to have to use another one, so I'll wait to use my Bolt Bend, and then I was like, oh, that does 1 extra damage, my thing's dead, and now I have a Bolt Bend I can't cast because my creature died. It's like, oh my God. And the thing's sitting there. Like it's just there on the battlefield. I know what the card does, you know, so, but I like it. I really do. I'm like, good, challenge me, right? Like, let's push it a little bit every once in a while, even though I have heard the sentiment online and I do agree with it, that if this was your first limited format, that could be bumpy, right? Yeah. This could be one of those things where you're going, I don't like this because it's too much.
Yeah. And I have sympathy for that. I think that the best way to get through is just accept this format is just so complicated that these things are just going to happen. Like, and not stress too much about it. It's not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling to just throw away cards on board or, play turn 2 Dreadhorde Invasion and then the opponent goes turn 3 Prison Realm. But it's not Oblivion Ring. It only exiles creatures or planeswalkers. That was not a good play. And you just have to accept that those kind of embarrassing things will happen from time to time.
Yes, indeed. Okay, let's get into a couple of things before we take off here. First, I've got a couple of just interesting talking points from some of our listeners. This one's from Matt, a friend of mine that drafts in my draft group, though he's on the East Coast now. And he says, I'm in the middle of your most recent episode of LR. You and LSV talked about how War of the Spark is not only a Prince format, but a King format. LSV said something to the effect of, you can make all the right decisions in draft, but once your opponent plays a Ketra, it doesn't matter. We have a local play group, and half the time we do Cube. Johnny, that's Matt's brother, recently voiced his opinion that Cube isn't fun since everyone is always doing busted things, and even though he's relatively good at regular draft, he hates getting blown out by abusive cube antics. He says, you and LSV both love cube, and yet you express reservations about whether the king nature of War of the Spark might limit its long-term fun value. My question is, what's the difference? In Johnny's eyes, both formats suffer for the same reason. In my view, cube is fun precisely because of its many bomb cards and interaction. And he says, hope all is well, Matt. And, I find that really interesting, and we touched on it a little earlier, but why doesn't it translate? Like, if there's a bunch of bombs there and we like it, if there's a bunch here, why don't we just like it here too, or do we?
Well, it's a really simple explanation. Mm-hmm. It's that everyone has great cards in cube, and a lot of them. In limited, it's you're playing with a bunch of 5 out of 10s, and your opponent plays a 10 out of 10, and your 5 out of 10s don't matter. Yeah. But in most cube decks, 20 of your 23 cards are just bombs, or very good or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's actually funny that in cube, you're actually not short of the cards we'd consider limited bombs. The, Sun Titan, Consecrated Sphinx, Grave Titan, Nicol Bolas, Ugin type stuff. You're not short on those. It actually makes it so cards like Mana Leak, Remand, Noble Hierarch, and Preordain are more valuable.
Mm-hmm. Because you can always get those. Yeah.
Right. There's always a Karn or a Mere Battle Sphere or a Sphinx's Revelation or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's fun, for me at least, for cube, is that everyone just gets to swing these haymakers around, and how you use your cards matters a lot. Because look, when part of the argument and the complaint we have about something like Oketra is we're all playing normal cards, then they play an Oketra. It outclasses everything by far. The game's just about Oketra, and that's it.
Yep.
When you're playing cube and everyone has access to 10 different kinds of Oketras, then your resource management all of a sudden matters again, because you both have these. And, sequencing matters a lot, because if you do it the wrong way and they play their trump to your trump, you could very easily lose, right? If you get your Oketra Treachery or whatever the equivalent is.
Yeah.
So I don't think cube it's a fair comparison here. Like, I get why you would think this way, but I find that cube is just tons of interaction and tons of new synergies and tons of cool things going on where everything does matter. Whereas our complaint in normal limited is that you have a bomb and your opponent does not, and that game is less interesting as a result. Cube, everyone really has access to busted cards.
Yeah, I think the thing that people don't like when cube that happens in cube is when things snowball. Right. When it feels like the first person to do something big then runs away with the game.
Right.
But I agree with you.
Jace the Mind Sculptor, activate it, and then they play their thing, and then you're like, kill your thing, activate Jace again, play another threat. And it's like,
this game's over. Right.
Well, and that's an argument against Vintage Cube, where sometimes we still see this in Vintage Cube where someone has a Soul Ring and a Black Lotus and an Ancestral, and the other person has none of those. Mm-hmm. And so then we're back in the category where someone has 10 out of 10s and you have all 7 out of 10s. Yep. But Legacy Cube tends not to have that, because there's not that many like peaks in terms of power level. Yeah. There's just a lot of cards at a high power level.
And what we need to do for Johnny is get Johnny to draft a Pauper Cube or an Uncommon.
Oh yeah, Pauper Cube's really fun.
That's where it's at. Yeah, you like limited fun. How about just everybody's on the same playing field there? This next one comes from Shannon, who's a longtime listener of the show. It says, hi, Marshall. Just a quick story I'd like to share. I'm an LGS owner in Bangkok, and we have a great time drafting War since last week. Just yesterday, every one of us players here unanimously agreed that we're banning the God Eternals from every casual draft in the store from now on. You can pick it, but you won't get to use it. So you got to make the call between whether you want the value of the card or the deck strength. It's up to you. It really led to non-interactive games and an unfun experience. How do you think of this house rule? Can you believe that, Luis? What an extreme, rule, right? They're just like, no, you can't play any of the gods in limited. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with, these cards are put in these packs, ostensibly for reasons other than limited. And if it was just limited, they wouldn't. And they just said, well, then let's just take them out. What do you think about that? I've never heard of anybody doing it.
Well, so Ben S. always talks about how him and his friends in Florida would deepen the format once everyone's played with all the rares and stuff. They would just do drafts where they would just take the rare out of every pack. Like, they'd open their pack, everyone just keeps their rare, and then they draft with, like, from then on. The rare is not used.
I've never heard that. That's insane.
I actually kind of like that better than this, because this is drawing a somewhat arbitrary line. Like, because I think Ral, for example, is better than Ilharg, but you banned Ilharg instead because it's in the cycle of the gods with the Oketra or whatever. So you can do whatever you want. Like, if if everyone is having more fun, then everyone's having more fun. I have no qualms about it. I think that it's one of the fun parts about a game like Magic is you can play it how you want, and it is modular. You get to tweak things. If you and your friends have decided that like, it's really unfun when someone casts Kaya's Wrath, so let's just build all our constructed decks without Kaya's Wrath. More power to you. Totally fine. If you want to draft without the God Eternals, you can do that. And if everyone's happy, everyone's happy. I would probably just draft either without rares or with all the rares because I find that line to make more sense to me. But I think this is totally fine.
Okay. I think it's kind of interesting take on it too. And by the way, for the record, I would not want to do that Ben S style. Like the rares are exciting. They're fun.
Yeah,
like,
I would too.
I do think that there's some that ruin it, but there's many of them that make it more interesting.
This format be a little lighter on ridiculous bomb rares than it is now, but I would also rather draft this format with the rares than without the rares. The rares are fun.
Yeah, same. Wanted to talk about the arena bots quickly here. I put up a tweet with a photo. I had gotten past Ronus, pack 1, pick 2 with a common missing out. And this, of course, is against the bots on arena. And I put it up as kind of a joke. Ronus is worth
than Ob Nixilis' cruelty, so that makes sense to me.
I don't think that's true, though. I really don't.
Worse than Callous Dismissal, yeah.
No, I don't think that's true
Ronus
either.
Is basically a Yavimaya worm.
Yeah, right. I took it. I took the Ronus, but I did put up the photo just kind of as a joke, really, because it's like, right. And I had seen many people, by the way, in response to that tweet, sending pics that just didn't look right. But it got me thinking about the bots.
Second pick Ugins and stuff.
Yeah, sixth pick. Yeah,
I think Kai tweeted a picture of like a fourth pick Ral or something.
Right.
Third
it's like
Ral,
it just would not happen. Now, so it got me thinking about the bots and what we know about them and what we don't. Because how do they work? I don't know. I have no idea how they work. We don't know, but there's some assumptions that we can make about it. And I'm thinking about this as far as like, how does this apply to us if we're going to keep drafting on Arena, which we are. So one thing that came to mind first, WotC have to be seeding the bots with some basic pick orders or algorithmic knowledge of the set, right? They're not just picking at random. So
no,
they have to start off on day one with some type of grading scale of some sort. I assume that they use ours because obviously, although that's not true because ours comes out later. But anyway, so there's something there. Then we know that they adjust the bots as they go along because they tell us that when they do updates or patches
to Arena. They just adjusted them, right?
Yeah, they did yesterday. It'll be right, or 2 days ago. It'll be right in the notes for the launch or for the patch, and it'll say we've adjusted the bots. And then I'm assuming that if they don't now, they will be doing some type of AI data gathering thing to have the bots pick up on what humans are doing and then mimic those, or at least, make adjustments based on
I make no assumptions about what goes on in there.
Yeah, I have no idea either. But I'm assuming that they're taking data, whether it's automated or not.
I'm just saying I don't have any idea, and I'm not going to make any assumptions because
okay. Fair enough.
I think there's a lot of different ways this could go, and I don't. Given where we've seen these all end up, I would not want to predict why things happen the way they do. Because
fair enough. Yeah,
I think
and same. But anyway, let's just assume that these are true or some version of them are true. It does set up an interesting pattern from our perspective as consumers of this product, which is that the bots should be most exploitable at the beginning of the format and then get less so as it goes further.
Yeah,
as they make adjustments.
We've generally seen that, but not always.
We have.
Yeah.
No, yeah, but we have. We really have. I mean,
rather,
remember
we've
the
generally
Gates deck
seen
was
that,
wide
but
open?
it's never gotten. I don't think it's ever been to the point where I felt there's no exploits.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah. There's always been holes that you can see, like they don't value these cards. Like, and that's where it usually gets to is like there's certain cards that the bots don't value highly enough, but that it actually ends up feeling pretty normal. Like I'm actually quite happy with where the bots end up by the end of it. But at the beginning, it doesn't feel right. And you get past gods and or the bots completely ignore an archetype like the Gates deck. And you're just going, what is going on here? So, but really, I don't really care. Like that's up to them to figure out. And if they want the best product possible, then they're going to have to, do the things needed to make sure that they get this process up to speed as quickly as possible, because it won't be a great experience if every set the first 2 weeks or first week and a half is just like, this isn't even close to what, you would expect to be in a draft. That's not a great user experience. So they're going to need to sort that out. What I care about is how does this affect us, for us, the people who actually draft on there? Because when I say exploitable, I'm saying you can exploit the bots, right? Like in Ravnica Allegiance or whatever, I could draft a completely busted deck. But you know what? You don't play against the bots. So while I need to have the knowledge to be able to exploit it to make the best deck that I can, I'm also playing against other people that are trying to do the same thing. Now, one edge I can get is by knowing these things and my opponent doesn't. Right. So if I go on there when the Gates deck was wide open, it's drafted every time because I know I can just force it, get at least a good version of it every single time. And my opponent's thinking, well, you know what, green white, I'm gonna draft this green red or whatever deck, and I can just smash them. Then great. I know that's what my job is. But beyond that, there's other people that are doing this as well. So the question I have is, how can we, like, is it just our job to stay as up to speed as possible on this? Is that the thing that we need to know, is what are the bots insufficient at, and just hammer it?
Yeah, I think that it depends on what you want out of this, because if you want to maximize your win rate on Arena, then yeah, that is one of the strategies you can do that, right?
Okay.
So let me give you I guess an analogy. Print runs exist, correct?
Yes.
You will win more if you memorize all the print runs or have a document with all the print runs. Because then when your opponent passes you a pack that has, let's just say, Chandra's Triumph in the pack and an uncommon missing, and you know they took Prison Realm, that gives you an advantage. You will win a little bit more because of that.
Yep.
We don't ever bother doing this.
No.
Like, sometimes you naturally memorize the print runs because there's just two really high impact uncommons, and you just start getting used to, you're like, oh yeah. I always know that Exclusion Mage is next to, whatever, something Seraph.
Well, there's an example from the last format, which is Dovin's Acuity was always next to High Alert.
Right. And
they were always in the same pack.
And you just, your brain just naturally picks that up, and that's fine. But I don't think either of us have ever really tried to like dig through all the...
No.
And all the print runs. And in fact, I think you actually will win less overall if you spend your time doing this, because I would rather spend that time getting better at Magic than I would trying to marginally increase my win percentage in a specific format. So I think that's actually a really bad use of your time. Like you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, these are public now. Like Ryan uses his. I mean, all he has to do is just do a Control F on a document he has open, and he can see the uncommons that are next to it. So I just in that way, he's not spewing. But
sure, I just don't think it's really worth your time. Like I think that.
Okay.
I think that the bots, knowing what the bots draft, is a kind of subset, or it's not a subset, but it's a different version of that. But I actually think it's worth it in that it's pretty low effort. That said, if you draft a lot, just pay attention to what you're drafting and pay attention to what other people are drafting and saying. It's going to be hard to get that impression off just your own drafts unless you drew 5 drafts a day. But I mean, for example, I always find I end up with a good deck when I'm blue-red on Arena. I don't know if that means that the blue-red deck is the bots undervalue those cards, but I'm starting to suspect it does. I'm not at the point where I think it is better to first pick Callous Dismissal and Ob Nicholas's Cruelty, because blue and red is that you just have to draft it, whereas like the Gate deck was to that point and we discovered it pretty quickly. But
yeah, I was day one. Remember I did the stream on that Tuesday and I'm forcing it, and it was like, wait, this is working every time. Something's wrong. Yeah. So
it depends on how dialed in you are to Twitch and other podcasts. Like we'll talk about our experiences. If you watch people stream, they'll talk about their experiences. I tend not to like go super deep trying to figure this out, because in general, I just want to be good at draft. I don't want to I find this part to be a little bit artificial, and I can't really explain why this is the line, whereas other things aren't. But like, I would rather find out what humanity or the drafting populace as a whole finds undervalued. Like, I think Toll the Invasion is undervalued in drafts with human beings. The fact that card X is undervalued in decks or by the bots is just less interesting to me. Like, sure, Soroform Hybrid was undervalued even to the end of the format. You could just get 6 of them all the time. That's not that interesting to me. I don't find that to be a compelling, like, that's not really why I play Magic,
I agree.
To try to beat the bots. If it does do it for you, do it. I'm very like, you know me, like I tend to think that people should do what they want to do as long as it's not harming other people. This is definitely just a way. If you get a lot of satisfaction out of this, I'm not going to tell you that you're doing a bad thing. I think you're doing a sweet thing. It's just not for me. I think if you're in if you know you're going to play a high stakes arena draft, then maybe it behooves you to figure this out. I tend to want to just draft for fun and to get better at Magic overall. So I don't spend a lot of time on this, but yeah, I think if you wanted to get the best possible results, then you would probably try to figure out what the bots tend to undervalue.
Yeah. And so I think the two things to take away here are, one, it's personal choice that you need to make. An example that I'll use is cube draft. I never draft mono red and cube basically ever, even if it's open. I don't care because that's just not what I want to do with my time, right? I know how that deck works. I know that it can actually win quite a bit in most cubes, and I don't find it particularly interesting, so I don't ever draft it. So that's a line that I set for myself, even though I consider myself a spike. Yeah. So you'd think, but I'll tell you what, if I told you you could draft mono red every single cube and have at least a 2-1 with a good shot at a 3-0 for the rest of your life, would you do it? No. Right? No, like even if winning is what matters to you, that's just not fun. It's boring. It's just, it would get old, even though you're like racking up, victory points or whatever. So that's a decision that you have to set for yourself. Luis, you said where you set your line. I'm in a similar spot.
Yeah, the other thing, I think it's just important for both of us to say that if this is how you want to interact with Magic and this is what you find fun, then like you're totally well within bounds to do that. And I would encourage you to do it. Like, yeah. I don't want anyone feeling bad that this is how they enjoy these things.
No, not at all. And to that point, I think the other thing that we should mention here is I'm going to be looking for, I keep my finger on the pulse of this as much as I can so that I can come on this show and tell our listeners, this is what the bots don't do. Yeah. If you are, if that, and I'm going to take advantage of it at least to a point as well. So I consider it part of our job to keep up on this. And we're going to tell you where we think the bots are at any given point as well.
Again, my anecdotal evidence is that blue-red seems pretty strong, but I can't say with confidence. It's just, I think I've drafted blue-red like 5 times recently on Arena, and every time my deck has been so good. But the bots did just update, so I don't have data post-update yet, so can't take that with a grain of salt. That said, I just think some of the blue cards are a little underrated, and some of the red cards too. You get Heartfire super late, you get Dismissal super late, you get Contentious Plan super late. Oh, Flux Channeler. Flux Channeler is a card the bots just hate. You wheel it like more than half the time. So
Spellgorger Weird also comes later than it should. So
you end up.
So keep an eye on that. Yeah, and then the last thing that I'll say about this is that I want human drafts.
Yes.
This all is in its bubble of working within the confines of bot drafting. But if there was human drafts, I would do that in a heartbeat over a bot draft. And I think a lot of people would as well. And I hope that we get that at some point. All right, last topic for the show here today. So there's an article that came out and a lot of people sent it to us. Thank you for those of you that did. Because of our use of our theoretical time traveling supercomputer, this is sort of our version of being able to figure out the optimal play as being told by a computer program or something like that, which doesn't exist. And an article came out called Magic is Officially the World's Most Complex Game. On technologyreview.com. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. And what I did is I thought, well, this is interesting because people were saying, LOL, the time traveling supercomputer wouldn't work anyway. And it's interesting because I've discovered 2 things. I learned 2 things and I'm going to share them with you here about this whole thing. One of them is that they were right. Even if we did have the supercomputer, it would not be able to solve what they were doing the way that they did it for this particular proof. But also, I think that the headline is a little Luis Scott-Vargas clickbaity and not quite accurate to what we can learn from it. The top 5 worst complex games in the world. So here's the deal. The headline is interesting, but what I did is I did 2 things. One, I read not only the article under the headline, but I also read the paper. And most of it was over my head, but I had some friends sort of decipher some of it. And then I also went on to the subreddit where the post was, and there was a lot of discussion in there. And I think I've parsed this down to something that I can explain reasonably here, because it's not quite what it says. The headline being, it's officially the world's most complex game, which makes most people, including me, think, oh, you're saying that the way this game is played is more complex than all the other games, which isn't actually what the proof was about. So this is what was going on with that. And I'm going to use some quotes from some Reddit users who seem to know what they were talking about and seem to be backed up by the other people in the thread, though this is from people that I don't know personally, and so you take it with a grain of salt. But basically what they did for this proof was they created a game state with forced actions using actually a legacy deck that showed that using a sort of brute force algorithm to determine the victor of the game was impossible. Okay. And here's some explanations. This one comes from Reddit user Rentar42. Rentar says, this proves that for some board states, there can exist no computer that can reliably compute the best move. It's not a problem of our computers are too slow or we haven't found the right algorithm yet. It's a proof that we can never build a fast enough computer or find a good enough algorithm for this problem. So that's the first thing, is that we're not talking about something that is like so complex that we just don't have the computer for it. We're talking about something that cannot be solved algorithmically, which is how they normally solve these type of things. Another Reddit user named A. McKee says, it kind of breaks it down like this. It's looking at the computational complexity of Magic's rules, which is kind of interesting because we're thinking about the game, but it's actually the rules, which is what a computer has to consider, not the average game. And the average game, again, is kind of what came to my mind when I thought, well, this is the world's most complex game. It's actually looking at the rules. So here's how it breaks down. Steps 1 to 5. Number 1, if there exists a general algorithm for determining which player wins a game of Magic, then for every game state, that algorithm can determine the winner. Okay, that makes sense. 2, there exists a game state which is computationally equivalent to a universal Turing machine, which is linked in the paper, by the way. Number 3, however, we know that computing the output of the universal Turing machine is undecidable. Therefore, there exists a game state where the winner is undecidable. Therefore, a general algorithm for determining which player wins a game of Magic cannot exist. The key point is proving that there's a complexity in the rules, okay? Even if it uses a very fringe example to do so, which it did, by the way. And he goes on, or they go on to say, there are other situations where the game state would be undecidable, but the original post proof is just the easiest case to prove mathematically. So the point here being that, and I'm going to go into this again, actually this is really cool. One of the authors of the article chimed in. In fact, I think all three of them did, but one of them particularly was chiming in a bunch in the thread named Stella Athena. And Stella says, this paper gives an algorithm for producing board states, not a single board state. Many of the board states produced by that algorithm result in Alice, which was one of the theoretical player, winning in a very short number of turns. Some of these board states result in an infinite loop and therefore a draw, and others result in Alice winning. What is difficult is determining which is going to be the case. Formally, the function that maps the set of all resulting board states, and when it's a draw, it's non-computable. Okay, the non-computability of this function implies the non-computability of determining strategy, as you need to be able to evaluate board states to play the game well. So the result of the game is totally determined by the rules. What's hard is telling which is the case in general. In practice, for small board states, they clarify small meaning fits in a room, it is quite possible to determine the outcome. So what we have here are people that basically said, we can make a scenario that if you were to take this deck / board state and just sort of iterate it out, it is going to spit out some number of times where there is an indeterminable, basically where it has an infinite number of possible outcomes. And it was really interesting, Luis, maybe a plug for CFB, but they mentioned that, if at some point you assembled, for example, a board state where you could generate infinite mana and you had a fireball, there are theoretically infinite number of possibilities from that point forward, right? Where you can do, for example, just fireball your opponent for 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to a billion, and then any another, sorry, not up to a billion, up to infinity, and any other number of combinations. And that's a result of Magic's rule set, not necessarily the cards or the average complexity of it. It just says, look, if you push the rules this far, we can make board states that are predictable and that will happen on some number of basis that we cannot predict the outcome for, because it has something that's infinite in it, and that doesn't allow us to do so. So you can't make an algorithm that does that, because at some point it'll hit one of these board states and it'll go, I can't do this anymore, because there's literally infinite and there's no computer that could solve it. But what Stella kind of clarifies here, though, at least the way that I read it is that if you were to box this in a little bit more and maybe take cards or situations out where there's an infinite board state possible and just eliminate those, and maybe there's probably other scenarios that would choke this thing up, that you actually can determine an outcome using an algorithm. Now, I don't know how feasible that is given the technology we have today, and I haven't seen anything that can do it. But this is, of course, theoretical. That's really interesting to me, because while the headline kind of screams, well, you can't solve this game or Magic's unsolvable, while they did prove that using sort of old cards in an obscure set, I bet you if you took a subset of cards like standard or limited, and especially if there didn't exist any combination of cards within that subset that could do something infinite or something that sort of broke the rules in that way, that you probably could use an algorithm to help, I don't really know what this word means, but solve Magic in that way. And I think that's really interesting, because what we think about for players, like what I want is a computer that can tell me if my play was right or wrong, right? I want to be able to upload the information of my board state into a computer program and hit a button and have it say, the play you made would give you a 57% chance to win on average. And if you had done this other play, it would have been 59. So you made the suboptimal play. That, of course, we don't have currently, but this actually, to me, does not preclude that happening at some point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Come on, man. This is interesting stuff. Don't you find this fascinating? You can't, don't troll me in the
not really.
Really? You don't like, you're a game designer and you don't find this stuff fascinating?
No, it's too theoretical for me.
Well, that's why I tried to bring it back to something more practical. I mean, not that we have anything practical, but
I was enjoying the whole ASMR bit. That's the part that I liked.
Come on, man. I genuinely find this stuff really interesting. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to, but you don't need to you don't have to look,
look,
make
I don't
it sound
mean,
like it's bad.
I don't mean to rain on your parade, but
well, you are.
It's a light drizzle at best.
I do agree with that.
It just gets past a certain point where it's just like, yeah, I know this is too complicated for what we have now, and as part of that is why I love the game. I don't really know. At no point have I ever felt it was going to be close to worth it for computers to try to replicate this, because which does call into question, are we spending our time on something trivial?
Mm-hmm.
I actually have wondered if there is a moral imperative for us to spend our so much time and brain power on something that doesn't generate something that advances the human race.
Mm-hmm.
The counterpoint to that is that I think games are really important. Games stretch your imagination. Games do make you better at solving other types of puzzles, and it brings happiness into people's lives. I think that being a game designer or being a content creator or a competitive player, all those things are probably net better for the world than something like being a hedge fund manager or something, where you're moving money around and basically, kind of not generating anything of value. Apologies to any hedge fund managers who are going to get mad at me for saying that, but
which we actually know quite a few hedge fund managers.
No, it's okay. They can weep into their piles of money.
Yeah.
But I think that,
but from a practical standpoint,
look, would it be better to have Frank Karsten modeling a more efficient way to save energy than the optimal mana base?
That's interesting.
Would humanity be better if he used his time and energy to do that? Well, maybe, and maybe the answer is yes. Maybe it's better if people follow their passions, and that's a little further afield. So yes, I don't want to just say yes. It's unprofitable to try to design a computer to play Magic, because it is. But that shouldn't necessarily guide us either. Maybe it's better to design a computer to stop climate change, because that seems like a very real, very pressing issue.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are someone with the skills to program or design a program like this, and this is what you want to do, and you're not harming anyone, and maybe it leads to other breakthroughs elsewhere in terms of artificial intelligence or any kind of machine learning, then yeah, that's cool too. So
yeah, and I think it does. I mean, I agree that this theoretical stuff doesn't have a lot of practical implication, but most of the important inventions we have.
I mean, I was joking before. I do think that the coolest thing about Magic is that it is almost indeterministic, what is right or wrong, and and trying to explain all the different reasons or quantify them with a set of variables would be very, very difficult, because we try our best, right? we are trying to provide an outline for people to get better and make better decisions. And we're trying to do it in a way that's general when a lot of the in-game things are specific.
Yeah, for sure. And that to me actually was my takeaway from this, because look, I'm not a computer science person. I don't know half of the stuff.
The science stuff is really not your
No,
forte.
I like that part, but yeah. And and as I mentioned, I do find it fascinating, and I did find this fascinating, but also like, I had to have a lot of this translated for me. I don't really know this stuff, but one of the things that was takeaway from a more practical standpoint, or at least a more human standpoint, was that this stuff is very much a mix of art and science for us, right? Like, there are things that we can determine using, the calculator that we use, the what's it called calculator, and, those type of things. But there's also a lot of this that you, at least currently, and in some cases never, will be able to show empirically what was correct or not. So you have to really be able to combine a whole bunch of different logic puzzles, a whole bunch of different experience, intuition. It really is a mix of art and science, very much so. And I find that part great. Like, I actually really appreciate that we can't figure these things out. Although I will say that in poker you can, and it didn't ruin. Maybe it did for some people. For me, it didn't ruin poker that you could do that.
But you're more like a PTQer when it comes to poker, right?
Yeah. So
like you're not top 5 in the world who then feels like, oh man, Deep Blue has it figured out, so this is less fun.
No, but it did affect. I mean, I played online for a long time, and the way that the trajectory went was that the games got harder and harder and harder and harder, and that was a lot of it was because people were doing computer modeling and realizing the way that we did things was wrong, and we've all had to make adjustments, to our poker games as we've gone along, and it would be kind of weird to see that. But the truth is that as with Magic, applying these things is also extremely difficult. Like, you can know all the stuff, but actually doing it is really hard. And in Magic, we don't even know all the stuff. We've just sort of intuited a lot of it. Anyway, pretty cool though that there's people working on Magic in that way, kind of banging at it with these theoretical things and these algorithms and everything. And I would be curious to see if at some point we do get something useful. Again, this whole thing was basically all theoretical. So I don't think that it was even part of the equation at all to say, hey, let's build a computer that does anything, meaningful for Magic. It was more just, kind of pushing the outer limits of the theory of it. But I wouldn't be surprised, at all if somebody was able to, for example, scrape a bunch of data from one of the online clients or something and then present that in some type of meaningful way. Like, that's not the same thing as this, but that could be useful to us one day as well.
I mean, to kind of continue this, and just so listeners know, this is at this point the sign off for the show.
No, dude, I have a sign off. I have a great sign off.
I thought you meant this was the sign off.
No, I have a great sign off.
We're just so deep into nonsense already. All right, well, whatever. Yeah, we're running with it. One of the things I think is really cool is how good do you want an AI at the end of the day? Because you want players to be able to play against your AI and have fun. You don't want, like, if you just got to choose, right? Like, a skill level of an AI from knows the rules of the game, but is terrible. Basically, someone playing their first 10 games versus John Hinkle, best player of all time. You wouldn't choose either of those. You would probably choose, again, like a PTQ level player who makes some mistakes, but generally plays all right.
Yeah, I want somebody slightly below me.
Yeah, you're a bit better than that, I would say. No, don't sell yourself.
I wasn't saying I'm just saying I want somebody slightly below. Like, wherever I'm at, I just want them minus 2% of whatever I'm at.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's interesting, but I'm not just like going to lose every time.
Right, and that's going to be the most fun. So this is a different thing than that, but people do make AIs. I mean, Sparky exists on Arena, like. Yeah. When working on Eternal, like, we've got an AI that plays single player gauntlet games, and those things do matter. So
yeah, for sure.
It's different goals in mind and a different scale of a project, but it is a pretty interesting thing. So I guess
we can end our computer science theory discussion on that point. That is going to do it for the show this week. You're going to want to stay for our sign off, though. It's going to be fun. We want to thank our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you sell your cards back to them. This is a big part of how you can keep in the Magic game. Sell your cards back. You get plus 30% on the trade-in if you want to trade them in for store credit, or you can just get cash. It's really easy to do over at Channel Fireball. Also, you can find everything related to the show at lrcast.com. That has links to all the stuff that we've been talking about as far as Luis's stream and all that kind of stuff. If you want to find us on social media, it's easy. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV, kind of everywhere. And yeah, that's going to do it for the show this week. We'll see you next time. Okay, Luis, are you ready?
Oh yeah.
I got this idea from another show that I listened to, and I kind of translated it for us. So I'm going to read you 10 tweets.
Okay.
5 of them were actually tweeted by Ben Stark, and 5 of them were generated by Woodrow Angle and myself. And you have to tell us which ones are the real Ben S tweets and which ones are the fake. You know, there's that Twitter account, I won't swear, but, you know, stuff Ben S says on Twitter. And this is kind of going to be like the real version of that. Are you ready?
It's Ben S says, just so we're clear.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Now I have to beep that out. That's awesome.
It's part of the sign off. That's not canon.
You know, there's children that listen to our show.
There's also children who are co-hosts on the show.
Yeah. All right. How many do you think you're going to get out of 10?
Oh, I'm going to get all 10 right.
Okay, let's do it. All right. First one. Today, we have what seems like our yearly battle between good and evil, and I hope everyone is cheering for good.
That is a tweet.
That is a Ben S. tweet? That is correct. He was referring to the New England Patriots, of course. All right, this one. And by the way, some of these are responses. Like I took some of these that were responses too, so just keep that in mind. After we make bots act more like humans, can we work on making humans act more like bots?
That is not a tweet.
That is correct.
It is very close to something Ben would say. In fact, I believe he literally he does believe that.
I think he does too. Next one. I've obviously said this before, but honestly, society would benefit greatly if we all agreed to abandon formal dress codes.
I think that is a tweet.
Gotcha.
Man,
God,
that is something Ben would say.
Yeah, totally. All right, next. The only question is, what's a better prize, a Rivals booster or a Pop-Tart?
That is not a tweet.
That is a Ben Stark tweet. All right, next. What round is it right now, and which hall am I supposed to be going to? Hashtag Kibler Google.
That is a tweet.
That is not a tweet. Oh man, we're getting you. This is great. All right, this next one.
It sounds like
does anyone
the AI that can replicate Ben S tweets is too advanced for this world.
Yes,
we perfected it.
We really have. It's not a theory anymore. Does anyone know exactly how the team queues and RPT queues actually works?
That's not a tweet.
That is a best tweet.
I'm going to just get 3 out of 10 right.
Oh, this is great. All right, this one's a poll. If all food on Earth was made by Chipotle, would the average quality of food on the planet go up or down?
That is not a tweet.
You are correct. You have gotten 3. We had to put a Chipotle tweet in there. This one's a reply. Why is seeing a piece of art in person better than viewing a high-quality photograph of it?
I think that is a tweet.
That is not. We made that one. All right, this next one. Pat Cox for president.
That's a tweet.
That is a tweet.
Yeah.
We've gotten 4. We got one more. This is honestly one of my favorite Magic moments that I participated in. My career highlights: 1, winning PT Paris; 2, Hall of Fame induction ceremony; 3, eating a burrito bowl.
This is definitely a tweet. I remember this one.
That is a tweet. So you ended up getting 5 out of 10.
All right. Well,
the AI is perfect.
Props to Woody for really, really replicating the Venice experience.
Yeah, he killed it.